Hello everyone and welcome back to another book review. Today I am going to be reviewing Goblin Quest by Jim C. Hines. This is what the cover of the book looks like, and I actually am familiar with Jim Hines. I've read some of his other works. I've read his Janitors of the Post-Apocalypse series, which I enjoyed, and I had heard that Goblin Quest was quite popular, so I decided to give it a read and see what I thought about it. So the first thing I want to mention is me holding this book up was a little misguided because I did wind up listening to an audiobook version, and I wound up listening to a reenactment audiobook version. I'm not really sure what to say, dramatic reading. The kind of audiobook where they don't just read every line word for word, but they kind of act out. So they leave out those little things that say like he shrieked or she sighed because they can just act that out in the narration. So I read that version. I wound up listening to that audiobook while I did some workouts. I just found it to be more effective. I could work out and run and walk while listening to this audiobook, but I'm holding up this so we have a physical prop because the audiobook is on my phone, which I'm filming with. So, Goblin Quest by Jim Hines. This book revolves around a very weak member of the goblin race named Jig. Jig the Goblin is picked on. He doesn't really get to have a lot of rights in his little society. He is a goblin who should be going out on raids or at least guard duty and patrol, but instead he is stuck inside the caves doing little kids' chores because he's kind of scared and not very strong. One day he gets kind of forced out to go on patrol with some bullies in the group, and he's kind of being made fun of and pushed around out there, and he kind of gets pushed out ahead of everyone else, and he has to navigate these goblin tunnels alone. So he lives in these tunnels in a mountain, which is why he has to keep going on patrols, because there's other people who live in the mountain who the goblins don't get along with, like the lizard fish of this lake and the hobgoblins who also live in this region. Well, Jig is out and about. He winds up running into some adventurers. And the setup for this book is really a classic D&D quest. This is your classic D&D band of adventurers who are going to get treasure and they want glory, and that's what they are here for. It consists of two brothers who are royal, they're princes, as well as a dwarf and an elven girl who is just kind of along for the fun. Jig manages to get caught by them and then manages to convince them that they need his help, particularly after the other goblins come to attack him or the adventurers, because the goblins like to attack adventurers in classic D&D format, and Jig is able to save his skin in the process of this whole thing and also get drafted along as a sort of slave captive, but also as a guide for the tunnels, because the adventurers think that maybe if they capture a goblin, they can use him to guide them through the tunnels. Of course, they're not very pleased about this situation and they do not treat Jig very nicely, but at least they have a guide for the tunnel. So Jig went from, in one day, being someone who just did little kid chores around the goblin home to being forced on this D&D-esque adventure with adventurers. And this is so far outside his comfort zone, he does not like this, and he's being forced to go through all these situations with these D&D adventurers who seem to really know what they're doing. He comes to learn that the adventurers are looking to get a rod of creation who they believe is owned by the dragon in the tunnel. Now, Jake has not been very far away from his tunnels, but he has been forced to attend these adventurers and get them to the dragon wherever he might be and get this rod of creation away and back to the prince. Now, Jig isn't entirely sure he wants to give the princes what they want, but he's also a captive, so he's kind of forced to go along with the party. And through the process of going along with this party, he becomes close to the elven girl, and he's just kind of going outside his comfort zone, doing things that he never would before, all on this funny D&D-esque, again, adventure. This book was really enjoyable and funny, and I think cements Hines for me as a really good author to read. I actually think this book was better than the Janitors of the Post-Apocalypse series, just a little bit, but I think that the other series is great as well. This book was funny. This book wasn't afraid to touch on maybe a little bit more serious topics, as in not everything ended perfectly all the time. There was the cute little sidekick in the form of Smudge, this spider. I liked the idea of having to... I always like the idea of the person who's under-equipped going along on these adventures and kind of figuring out as the adventure goes. It feels, in my opinion, very Terry Pratchett-like, but I'm sure Terry Pratchett did not invent that trope or that idea of the under-equipped person having to go out on an adventure. Jig's internal dialogue was really interesting. I mean, what he was saying was really interesting and funny, and I found myself laughing throughout this entire book. The premise is very clear. I feel like you understand what's going to happen from the very beginning. I mean, is Jig ever really going to be in true mortal danger? It's more of a humorous adventure fantasy read, but I think if you're looking for that humorous, enjoyable fantasy read, then Goblin Quest is a great pick. I can't believe, honestly, it took me this long to read it because I've been hearing about it for a while, but I never picked it up. I think partially because I was finishing the other series by Hines, but I think he's just a really good writer and he's able to write humorous situations without losing any serious topics that maybe he wants to address. And I like that balance because I feel like sometimes authors don't have that balance. I don't really enjoy super, super dark books, but I think there's a way to talk about darker topics without getting too dark, if you understand that. And I like the fact that I can laugh along with a fantasy book without it just being totally meaningless and totally just fluff, that there's no substance to the story. This book is in paper format, about 346 pages. Well, not about, it is exactly 346 pages. The audiobook I listened to, I think, was between 6 or 8 hours long, so it didn't take too long for me to get through. It was very enjoyable, very funny. I did like, I think it was called a graphic audio production. If you look around, you can find this reading of the audiobook that's done in a more dramatic style, and I really, really enjoyed it. I believe there's other books in this series. I'm not really sure how the series would continue because I'm assuming maybe it's just Jig going on various other quests and adventures, but I'm not sure if I will read those, or at least not immediately, but those also exist if you would like to continue this series. And overall, I would give this a 5-star. I had a great time reading this series. I had a fun time. I was laughing. I also was very invested in the adventure and all of the characters. I felt like each of the characters in the adventurer group had their own personality, and I had just a fun time reading it. And that's really all I can ask for a humorous fantasy book. Did I have a fun time reading it? Did I enjoy reading it? And would I recommend it to other people? And all of those are a complete yes on my behalf for Goblin Quest by Jim Hines. If you've read this book, please put your comments in the comment section below. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of